411 Live.
Where you can learn about issues that affect us every day. State of world, 411 Live.
Real people, real talk.
Made to help people in our community in every way. For your girl, 411 Live.
The federal eviction moratorium expired March 31st. Now what? What about the people who lost their jobs and they didn't pay the rent because they didn't have the money? Well, that debt didn't go away, so they still owe that back rent. Are there many evictions now? Will there be? What about housing disparities? Hello, I'm Beverly Taylor, and this is the 411 Live, Real People, Real Talk. We're going to talk about some of those issues, but joining me to do that, I have two guests. Jarrett English, who is the Director of Housing Development for Metcalf Park Community Bridges, and Melody McCurtis, who is Deputy Director and Organizer for Metcalf Park Community Bridges. Welcome to both of you.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. Okay, so I know we've got the sound, so we're ready to go. Let's just dive into this. Let's start with the moratorium because, it was out, it was extended, but there was a call to action with it. You had to go to the CDC or another website to download that declaration. You got to sign it, give it to the landlord. And I'm just wondering, were there some people who heard about eviction moratorium and heard a date and just figured, I'm good. I'm under this moratorium. I don't have to worry about it. And they didn't do the action that needed to be taken. Did you find that within the community, Metcalf Park?
Yeah. So, one of the things that we did, because we know that our community was not getting that information, right? Mm-hmm. They were not receiving the steps to be able to do it. So we had to create some printed language and materials to really guide them step by step and get those informations to those doors, right? Yeah. Because everything about it was online, and our folks from March to now are saying we are not online, right? We still need to be communicated with through phone, through text, through door to door. So that's what we have done. And a lot of folks were confused about all of the steps. Mm-hmm. And then when folks went through all of those steps to even try to get some rental support that came down, all of the money that came down, right, they were on a waiting list. Some of them never got that rent support, right? Oh, wow. So the whole process was not, it wasn't a fair process to me. It was not a process where it wasn't overwhelming. And, in my opinion, the rent should have been canceled, right? Not a pause on it. It should have just been canceled for the times that we're in. And I'll toss it to Jarrett.
People, I think this is something that we see often, but that folks in different institutions and in government really don't even think about. When we talk about, or anyone talks about, like the top-down approach, these are, in a lot of ways, perfect examples of it, because what you get is lawmakers and or bureaucrats in the government and or folks in nonprofit institutions saying, well, you know what, this is pretty easy. There's this thing on this CDC website. It's only 9 pages, things like that.
Yeah.
It's only got a couple footnotes. You like 10 footnotes. And then expecting someone with a family, with children, trying to find some type of work or sustenance during the pandemic quarantines and all the restrictions of that, and being able to manage something like that. And it's very much similar to, when people talk about how Black and brown communities aren't always as engaged in voting as they could be. And it's not necessarily because people don't want to be, it's because they have 20 things more pressing and important at that moment to deal with than, trying to get to the place where they have to do their documentation or register to vote or wherever it may be. Or in this case, activate this moratorium kind of restriction for themselves.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just about to say, listening to you guys, I hear two things. There is a digital divide that's really real, and there are priorities in people's lives.
Absolutely. And speaking specifically of that, and kind of to Melody's point, when people say, well, we like to think and be very practical and very kind of the ground up from things. You don't build a high rise from the sky. You start deep in the ground, so you anchor it, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we do in Metcalf. When we talk to residents, it's the same kind of thing. It's a priority list. So, if they are in a position where they have lost their income or can't pay rent, how likely is it that this person is also not rationing and or has canceled whatever internet connection they might have to be able to do anything? Like if food is up here, internet is going to be way down here. And so to even assume that a person has access to that, it's one of those things that kind of like white privilege, but otherwise privilege, economic privilege, it blinds you. Yeah. And you don't even see those types of possibilities because that's not your life.
Right.
And that's often how, not just this country, but extra particularly Milwaukee and the state of Wisconsin have operated or do operate.
Yeah. And go ahead.
To take it a step further, when we look at the landscape of Milwaukee, right, we have no rent cap. 50% of Milwaukee is owned by folks that don't live in Wisconsin, period, right? We have a lot of slumlords, right? There's an eviction tool out where you can see, by property, how many times this landlord has evicted people at that property. So when we look at all of these, this data, right? People are just seeing this data, but our folks in our community are living this data, right?
Right.
So we are seeing that every day and how it plays out. So even when you say pause the rent, we have slumlords that are not fixing, major things that need to be fixed on the house. I mean, we got people, my heat is not working and my landlord hasn't came to fix it, right? And then even when you say, hey, we have this money to support your rent, most of that rent is going to a slumlord that doesn't deserve rent. So we really got to be mindful of the systems, the structures, and the policies and procedures that's in place, right? Because if we don't do that, we keep making decisions that make the outcome worse and worse and worse when we're talking about BIPOC communities, especially Black communities, and especially residents that live in Metcalf Park, whose median income is under $20,000 a year.
Wow.
Renters are 76% of the entire neighborhood, right? We really got to be mindful of that. And what we're saying is we don't want people to say racism is a public health crisis, right? I want you guys to say it, but I wanted to see it played out, right?
Yeah.
And how you see it played out is, hey, the rent is canceled. Period. You're not going to owe back rent.
Okay. What do you say to the landlord who says, well, if I don't get the rent, I can't pay the mortgage? So a lot of these landlords, a lot of the housing stock that we have in Metcalf Park specifically, they have owned these homes for a long time. A lot of them have purchased the houses from the city, so they don't have mortgages, and all they have is taxes. And a lot of the renters in Metcalf Park, we got renters renting for 20 years, 5 years, 10 years. They didn't pay for the price of that house already, times two. Yeah. So I don't really want to hear about somebody saying they got a mortgage.
And, we talk about things like during the last I guess you could call it stimulus at the kind of beginning of the pandemic, and the PPP loans and things like that. A lot of those funds went to small companies and things like a lot of the landlords that own a lot of the property. And so, if they, whatever, their maintenance crew, whatever, they would say, I need $300,000 to keep them employed, they got it. And as long as they kept those folks working, or at least, could show the government that they were working, they didn't have to pay that money back. And I don't know, the 600 pages of the new stimulus bill. So I'm sure there's something else in there. But, a lot of the assistance when it comes to monetary assistance, the vast majority of it oftentimes goes to sustaining the business interests. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But, you have to have balance. Like, you don't want, obviously, the economy to crash, but the economy is nothing if people don't have any money to spend feeding and clothing and housing their families.
Well, let me ask you this.
And so Millie's absolutely right.
Okay, let me ask you this. With the American Rescue Bill that, recently the president signed, about $2 trillion, within that, the $1,200, the child care or child assistance part, the $30 billion, I think, went to emergency rent relief program, but I think you need to apply for that. But do you think these things will help a lot of the residents? Is it enough to help them to stay in their place, to pay that back rent, to sustain them?
So they will, but it's one of those things of not enough. And, it's very true that, yes, the United States is the third largest country on earth population-wise, but there are nations who were giving their residents stimulus funds every single month this entire last year. And you look at a nation like New Zealand, you look at some of the kind of East Asian nations, and one of the ways they've been able to sustain and not only keep their economy going, but keep the source of that economy, the people, sustained, and obviously they're not perfect either, is to make sure that they are giving the support to their citizens that they're supposed to. And so, one of those things, and we won't go into political wonk talk, but somebody said once upon a time deficits don't matter. That is probably 90% true. When it comes to the federal government, since, the government controls the money supply, literally makes it out of thin air, and literally the faith and credit of the people of the United States. When people talk about the debt of the United States government, the vast majority of it is not owned by foreign entities. It's owned by us, the citizens of the United States. And so that changes the conversation completely when you think about that. That being the case, it's kind of like, and I don't want to, Melody knows I can get a bit nerdy, but there's a thing called startup energy. So when an engine starts, or anything that is producing work, and that's, there is what they call an activation energy. So there's a high level to get this engine going. But once you get the engine going, the bad boy sustains itself. And that's kind of how economies work in a lot of ways. It's like you have to keep it going because it's such a large thing that, it does slow down, that friction drags everything. But if you can keep it going, or in the case of stimuluses, inject those resources into the not just the economy, but the very base level of the economy, which is the people, they will automatically sustain the rest of it. And so, as Melody was saying, we talk about canceling the rent. You could have done such a thing and said, okay, the government's going to give you a certain level of assistance, landowner or property owner, to, take care of your obligations. We're going to force the banks to accept those obligations. This is extenuating circumstances. Nobody wants a Great Depression.
Right.
Let's do this.
Yeah.
And more or less, you think about the mortgage crisis back in 2008, that's more or less what they did.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that I would add to that is, once that money rolls in, right, to different states, how is it going to be implemented, right? How is it going to be dispersed to communities, right?
Now that's big.
It could be helpful, but it what we saw is a lot of things that came down weren't helpful. Yep. So the folks in those positions of power making those decisions, they need to stop being disconnected to the community. Their way is not working, right?
Yeah, we need to get on the same page.
We need to get on the same page. I mean, it's a lot of different folks surrounding Milwaukee doing a lot of different work, right? For them, by them, right? So Metcalf Park is just one of the examples of that. But they really need to sit down and listen, right? Or we just need to give them a directive, because it's getting out of hand, and money coming in, and then none of the nobody in the community benefited from it, and they're living here, they're working here, they're spending their final days here. They should be able to be valued in the place that they live, and they should be able to benefit from anything that comes into their state.
Not enough different voices at the table, I think. I think that's a big thing. Yeah. But we're going to pause. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back, and we're going to talk a little bit more on renting. Landlords investigate potential renters. Should renters investigate landlords? We'll be right back.
COVID-19 has changed how we spend weekends with the girls. Now it's time to take the first step that lets us get back to brunching instead of late-night munching. Before we can safely come together, we need the facts. As COVID-19 vaccines become available, you may have questions.
Should I get it? Is it safe? Should I wait?
It's okay to have questions. Now get the facts at getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you.
Because the fight isn't over yet.
You will see me choose to protect my community by wearing a face cover.
And even with my face covered,
you will see me.
As a son.
As a man with a never quit attitude.
As a fighter for change.
Join me in wearing a face cover.
To help stop the spread of the coronavirus.
Because this is one small act of kindness
that has the power to make a big difference.
Welcome back. I'm talking to Jarrett English and Melody McCurtis with the Metcalf Park Community Bridges, and we've been talking about evictions and renting and all those different things. You mentioned something earlier about the percentage of renters in the Metcalf Park area, and it was extremely high. Tell me that again.
Yeah, so Metcalf Park have 76% renters in the community. And a lot of Black communities in Milwaukee have similar numbers like that. Mm-hmm. And it's not because folks don't want to own. They don't have access to be able to own, right? Or the wealth to be able to own, right? And a lot of their income, 9 times out of 10, 85 to 90% of their whole income is going to rent and utilities and different things like that. So how do they have the ability to save, right?
Absolutely. I was thinking about that because people are drawn to, say, Milwaukee to buy property, rental property, because rent is so higher as compared to property costs. So many people in that area are probably paying more for their rent than I'm paying for my mortgage.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
The average rent in Metcalf Park is $700 to $1,200 a month. And we got somebody that's paying $1,200, and her house is next to 2 vacant lots. Across the street is a foreclosed house, and then 2 vacant lots next to that. So our rents are some of the same rents that folks are paying in River West, so that's the reality.
It's cheaper to own.
Milwaukee is one of the few cities in the entire nation that it's cheaper to buy a house than it is to rent. And to all the points that you all mentioned, there's one thing to, being a good landlord and investing and making your property and the community better and being good to your tenants. It's something else to be predatory and, callous and derogatory and anything you can think of. Residents of Metcalf Park have experienced in dealing with their landlords.
So some landlords, not saying all, some landlords look at it as an opportunity, an investment, make some money, but aren't willing to put anything into it to, be what we would classify as a good landlord. Do you have any stats about the eviction rate?
So we looked at one block last year, 37th Street, And it was over 200 evictions on that one block. On that one block for 2 years. For one block.
That's unheard of. That's unheard
for
of.
one block. So if we look at one block, imagine how if we looked at all the blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of folks, Melody gives that actual real life statistic. And there was a book a while back, and it had a lot of relevant information, and it's, those things are great because, people who just don't even think about this stuff actually might. But what was in that book was basically what people know literally every single day. Nobody needed, a Harvard author to come and tell them that. But that is the type of thing that happens here in Milwaukee, where somebody will wait for somebody from the outside to say, oh my God, Milwaukee, do y'all see how bad things are? How much, your people are suffering? And when the people themselves go downtown to City Hall, or they go to the courthouse, or they go wherever, a lot of what they say falls on deaf ears until somebody else comes in. That book said something like, on average, every 6 months, people get evicted. I would not be surprised if it's, in addition to what Melody just said, much, much higher than that. The reasons that, with everything that's going on with the pandemic, that number is potentially going to spike much, much higher. And so, that's why, we in Metcalf Park, we're treading a different road. So,
yeah, if you're paying 75, 80% of your payment, your wages to rent, there's not a lot for anything else. And if one slight emergency happens, that knocks everything off. So then you're in that spiral. Go ahead.
The reality of it, once somebody is evicted, they are at risk for predatory landlords, right? Landlords, some landlords, the better landlords won't rent to them. But the landlords whose history is evicting folks and not fixing things on their property, not being responsive, they target those type of renters. And that's when you just see this whole cycle of evictions happening. But it's putting folks at risk. So even now, when folks don't have the rent and they get evicted, that might affect them for like the next 5 years because it stays on their record. Right. Even if they pay the rent, right? If that landlord starts the process of a court hearing, that still is on their record. And some people will say, even though it was resolved, even though it was paid, even though it was dismissed, we still won't rent to you. So it's a whole cycle of just declining families' ability to create wealth and to thrive once that's on their record.
And when people are looking for rental property, to rent, how do they go about checking out the landlord?
Well, now
they don't.
They don't, right? And now it's this app that's readily available for folks to see how often the landlord evicts. And one of the things that we're going to be doing next week is printing that material out and taking it to the door so folks can be able to look, do a background check on these landlords, right? So just doing that education piece, but there was no way to do it, right? There's a way to CCAP folks. And it's hard to CCAP landlords because a lot of landlords have 50 different business names and LLCs, and it's a whole mess. But I'm gonna let Jarrett add that piece on there.
No, you got it just smacked on the head. That's exactly what it is. People don't. There's a few things going on. So, and this goes back to kind of what we were saying in regards to thinking from the ground up. So you think of a person who was just evicted from another property. That person may have a couple children, have a dog, have a job that they, is not paying enough, whatever it may be, or no job at all. And so that person is not, they're in a crisis mode and almost continuous. And you can think, with 200 evictions, I don't know, because we have so much kind of empty space now what the average number of units on a block are right now. But that's, verging on 1 or 2 evictions per person per year.
That's crazy.
And that being the case, if you are in a situation, as Melody said, where you cannot, you won't, the quote unquote good landlords will not accept you, then the bad ones, they're just sitting there waiting to devour you.
Yeah.
And you have no choice. You have no, even if you do have the information, that might very well be the only option that you have is to go and live in that bad landlord's property. And so we're in a situation in Milwaukee. And I used to work for a large civil rights and civil liberties organization a few years ago. But one of the things we did there that's very analogous to this is deal with kind of the citation issue, where people in Milwaukee, particularly Black folks, brown folks too, but extra particularly Black folks, have not just scarlet letters put on them, they have scarlet encyclopedia series put on them. And when we talk about accessible opportunity, everything in this nation is based on credit, or, your access to credit, or your ability to get investment. And all of that is based on the paper records that are left on you. It doesn't mean anything about your character or who you are or what you're trying to do or your aspirations. But if it's on those records, as Melody said, whether, CCAP, though you may have paid your debt to society, quote unquote, and or otherwise records, eviction records, that is basically there forever. And so when you talk about access to opportunity, it's like a door that's fastly closing, and you can get your hand to it, but it might get cut off.
Right. Let me ask you this, because we're about to run out of time, but I know that there's an effort going on with you guys to get housing, help people own their homes. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. Long before I worked in Metcalf Park, I volunteered there. RED, Donnell Cross is one of the best, if not the best in the city. And Melody, one of the best, if not the best community organizer. And that being the case, roughly 2.5 years ago now, something like that, right, Melody? We started really kind of thinking about all these issues. And one of the things that differentiates Metcalf from almost every other community serving organization is that we don't do anything without getting the residents' input, and not just input, but thorough, deep, months and weeks long input in what they want us to do.
So what has this resulted in?
I'm sorry?
What has this resulted in?
So, time. Yeah. What it's resulted in is that we have a housing strategy that is resident focused, that will, we don't want to give too much of it away, but, and that's not to be, kind of hooty tooty about it, but it's just to make sure that we get it done before, unfortunately things like this can get attacked. But it's making sure the residents have access to housing, making sure that they have rental property that's not just affordable, but high quality, that doesn't poison their families. You don't have to worry about the children getting lead poisoning, the walls falling in, and making sure that the community that's built is reflected in the built environment.
Very good. So when this program gets off the ground, and you're more into it, people are seeing it, and you're ready to talk more details about it, you guys come back, okay?
We're going to come back.
We sure will.
Okay.
This is the bottom line. We are creating houses that's owned by the community for the community, right? The community that already lives there, that needs to benefit from all and any development within their neighborhood. And folks can donate. They can follow us on Facebook, or they can go to our website, metcalfparkbridges.org, to donate to our housing strategy.
Excellent. Hey, you guys, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for being, kind of in the trenches, so to speak. You have organizations that are kind of circling around way up here and saying, I can do this, I can help, but they don't really know what help is really needed. And you guys know, and you're, inviting the community to give input. So that's awesome. So thank you again for joining us. We have Jarrett English and Melody McCurtis, and they are with the Metcalf Park Community Bridges. Thank you for what you do, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Beverly.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of the 411 Live, Real People, Real Talk. Hey, we are a nonprofit organization, so if you'd like to help us, go to our website, the411live.org, and donate, sponsor, anything, and leave comments. We like that too. So until next time, I'm Beverly Taylor, and this is the 411 Live. If you would like to check out past episodes, there are many ways. Go to your favorite podcast platform. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Like and watch us on Facebook. Watch and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have suggestions for future episodes, go to our website, the411live.org.